sounds pretty straightforward, but when we start to see all the obstacles, and this is really explains why it's so hard. So first, I think it's also helpful to factor in just the idea, the Buddhist idea of karma, is that we don't, we tend to have this view that we start this life fresh. We know that we would say we bring in the genetic tendencies of mummy and daddy and grandma and grandpa, but we generally speak, we kind of start fresh. And then we look to all the various circumstances out there to find the cause for why we do things. So most of the time, when you're a fairly normal person, there's no one's really worried about it. But when extreme things happen, either like if you become Mozart or you become Hitler, so then we start to get puzzled about what is it that Hitler's mummy must have done to cause Hitler, and what is it indeed, Mozart's mummy must have done. And if you start to look, you can't find much evidence. So then we get kind of a bit puzzled about it. Whatever. So we just factor in the Buddhist view here. First, we have to factor in the possibility that your consciousness is not your brain. Second, it doesn't come from mummy or daddy or a creator, and that it's a continuity of its own that goes back. So these, as a concept, that's not too complicated. It's just that it goes against what we assume, So it might just sound weird. But let's just take that view here. That you come into this life programmed with aspects of what you've done. Everything you do, think and do and say, and what happens to you is the result of what you've done before. It's not the sum total of what you've done before. If our lives go back and back, we've got these countless seeds in our little bank vaults, if you like. Given that every single thing we think and do and say leaves seeds in the mind, there must be millions of seeds that will bring millions of different kinds of experiences. So like I said, there are 4 ways that our past actions will ripen in the present. The first is our very own humanity. We are the cause of that. It's the fruit. The Buddha would say getting a human body, going to a human womb, is the fruit of a lot of virtue, a lot of morality. Just getting a human mother. The second one is the tendencies in your mind. And so we can see you have the whole spectrum from wackos and Hitlers to all the ready to Mozarts and saints. There's a whole spectrum of tendencies in human minds, aren't there? And these are all the fruit of the habits of that person. The third one is all the experiences you have at the hands of others, the people you meet in this life. Let's face it, if we think of our life up until now, there's a bunch of people we've met in our life who've been nice to us, pretty much. Some have been mean and some do neither. That's called friends, enemies and strangers. There's no fourth category. And this fits with Buddhist psychology, because there are 3, there's attachment, aversion, and then there's ignorance. So then the fourth way is called environmental karma. So we'll go into this maybe later. But the thing is here, when we begin to study the Buddhist model of the mind, all the different parts of our mind that play a role, and then we factor that in with karma, then it really reinforces why it's not easy to change our minds. So there's one example I like to use. It's like years ago, a woman in Kopan Monastery, Lama Zopa's monastery in Kathmandu that I met, who just heard a teaching by Lama Zopa about karma. And she came to my room and she was crying. I always tell this story because it's a good example of what I want to try and say. So she said that this was her boy who died 5 years before. He was 29. She said he'd been a fisherman all his life. So, okay, then she was hearing suddenly Buddha's view about killing, that, best not to kill any sentient being because sentient beings don't want to be harmed. They all got Buddha nature. They've all been humans in countless lives and all the rest, including us. And so then the fundamental one in the Buddhist view, the first step is, don't use your body and speech to harm sentient beings. At least try and leave them in peace, And then as you progress, you can actually benefit them as well. And that includes the ants, the fish, the tigers, and all the rest. Well, that's contrary to even most religions. We know that. I was taught as a Catholic that God made animals for humans' sake. I'm not criticising these views, I'm just stating them, So this is a big shock to her to hear that her boy, whom she adored, a lovely boy, spent his life killing fish. And then he died when he was 29, scuba diving. So she'd always anyway, she said to me, well, where do you think he's been reborn? Because she heard about reincarnation and she was just curious. I met her years later. She's not a Buddhist or anything, but this was a very moving experience for her. So anyway, we talked. So then the point is this, though. Let me explain bringing in karma plus the way the mind works and attachment, especially attachment, why it's really hard for us to see our own mind and why it's hard to even see, because of our delusions, why we harm others when it seems evident to someone else, for example. Okay, so there he was, this boy, born to this mummy in California. So if you look at these 4 tracks of karma, he got a human body. So he must have had lots of karmic seeds in his little bank vault, you know, of virtue, goodness, non-killing. So that one of those was triggered before he stopped breathing, and that programmed him to go to his mummy's womb in California. The second lot of karmic seeds were all his tendencies. So she said he was a very nice boy, very intelligent, very kind, very generous, a really nice human being. But one of his tendencies, as we can see, was a tendency to kill. And in his case, it was killing fish, which in our world we consider perfectly reasonable. I mean, imagine if he had a habit to kill poodles. He would have been in serious trouble. Isn't it? Which really shows how ridiculous we are, because we're attached to poodles and, you know, have them as pets, but we attach to fish to kill them, to eat them. So therefore we have a very different view about the fish and the poodles. But as far as Buddhists are concerned, fish and poodles are the same. You know, or like in the Philippines, they eat dogs. I mean, if a Filipino in America ate a dog, they put in prison. So it just shows our minds are so full of attachment, our own views of what is good and what is bad, you know. So anyway, this guy, he spent his life fishing. And the point is this is what happened. So she said he was a little boy and he met fishing for the first time. Well, this is the way, how you can bring in the way karma works and the way attachment work together. So here he came into this life programmed with his own tendencies. Good ones, yes, but also this one. And this didn't ripen, this killing one didn't ripen until he met the condition called fishing. So then suddenly what happens is, and I'm just using my own language, he sees fishing for the first time. That basically, it's like awakens his memory. Which is meaning the karma to do it, the tendency is there. So straight away, because he's done it before, he's got the strong habit to kill, he suddenly meets fishing, and then instantaneously attachment is triggered that makes the fishing look delicious. This is what attachment does. You know, I always think of Romeo and Juliet, or more precise, West Side Story. I always think of West Side Story, you know, I've got on my iPad. So Maria and Tony, isn't it? They're at the dance, and the sharks and the jets are all there, and suddenly they lay eyes on each other. So everything else goes away, doesn't it? Do you understand? Well, that's karma ripening. They've got intense karmic relationship from the past. Even that song, Something's Coming, Tony sang. Do you remember West Side Story? He sang a song, Something's Coming. He could feel it coming. That's how karma is. And good things or bad things. This is the way it is. The seed has been planted, God knows how many lives ago, and you're getting towards the point where it's going to pop into life. So we know this with people, with jobs, with scenarios. You feel something, you know. This I thought was so interesting. Something's coming. So then they meet and suddenly, boom, fall in love. Well, he basically met fishing and instantly fell in love with it. So what that means is attachment, which is a little junkie inside him, wanting to find something delicious, and suddenly this intense thing that he's done in the past, the programming is there, the tendency is there, it lands on fishing, and then the attachment does various things. Certainly with Romeo and Juliet, with Tony and Maria. It simultaneously makes the object look completely divine and triggers extremely delicious feelings in the body. That's the function of attachment. So okay, in the more advanced Buddhist teachings in the Vajrayana or the Tantrayana, they have these detailed descriptions of this intimate relationship between the subtle physical energies, all the prana, and it's all dealt with in great depth. And the Tibetan medical system is based on this. They talk about how we have this subtle nervous system, these subtle channels through which courses this subtle wind energy, or the prana, and all our different states of mind are connected to those wind energies. And the Tibetan medical system, your doctor will feel your pulses, and this is similar to the Chinese. She'll feel there's an imbalance of certain wind energies which is connected to your attachment, because it's connected to it, the attachment, that part of your mind, the habit of attachment is connected to those winds, and that's why you're having panic attacks and anxiety. Or it could be anger, you know. So there's this really elaborate description, and it's similar to the yoga system. So where the states of mind are connected to these different wind energies. So when attachment is energized, we know the feelings in the body are completely divine, especially when it's like what we call sex, which is the object usually being a body. But with him, you could almost argue it was like sexual pleasure. So the point here is attachment is not referring to the object. This is the commonest way we use the word in ordinary life, but not here. It's referring to this state of mind that is this neediness, this craving, and then when it gets its object, it triggers immensely delicious feelings. Now, there's nothing wrong with nice feelings. That's called happiness. We all want that, nothing wrong. But attachment is the method we get to trigger the nice feelings. So if you've got strong attachment to, say, having sex with girls, so when you meet a girl shape, even when you're a little kid, you'll get all excited. But him, it was fishing. I remember reading Robert Hughes, an Australian art writer for Time magazine for 40 years. He's dead now. And he was completely in love with fishing. And he talked about the first time he went trout fishing, he said it was like a cosmic experience. A person who tortures feels the same. There was one guy in America years ago called BTK, who had this whole scenario that was kept secret, of course, for 30 years until he was caught, where he would kidnap, BTK, bind, torture, kill. He'd kidnap groups, wives, families, husbands, and then he would have this elaborate scenario in this cellar in his house. He'd torture them, he'd then do other things and then kill them. And he got all his pleasure from that. He called it sexual pleasure. What that means is the immensity of the pleasure was so strong. And why that is from the habit of having contact with objects like that. So we call it sexual because the usual way that is triggered when a girl and a boy, old-fashioned, sticks thing in a hole and something happens. I mean, excuse me. But the same level of pleasure of this torturer, I said, we wouldn't like to talk about it in the same way because it sounds repulsive. Well, this fisherman, the same. He mightn't have had orgasmic pleasure, but pleasure is pleasure is pleasure. It's a question of degree. And what triggers pleasure in our mind, for us at the moment, being samsaric, is getting an object of attachment. So in his case, it was killing fish. For the torturer's case, it was torturing people. For a little ordinary little kid who's a boy who likes girls, to be having sex with girls, which we consider normal. But now it's girls having sex with girls, and boys having sex with boys, and girls having sex with dogs, and dogs having sex with God knows what. We get very dissatisfied, so we have to keep changing, I think. But even have you heard about furries? Have you ever heard of furries? Anybody in this room?
From you.
Oh, from me? Oh. There you go. Well, it's kind of blows your mind when you understand attachment. There are these people, and then more and more, you look online, you'll see. I remember first reading about 20 years ago in Vanity Fair. There's an advantage in reading magazines, you see, you know what the world does. This kid in America, he would be at the sports, and he'd get turned on by the Mickey Mouse mascot. Well, most of his friends got turned on by the girls. So he worried about himself, he didn't know what was going on. He kept getting turned on by animals. So of course he doesn't know why, he's weird, he doesn't talk to anybody about it, and eventually he grows up and he goes online, he meets his people, they're called furries. So they're people who get sexually turned on by either real animals or in his case, which is common, toys. He spends all his money on eBay, on stuffed toys. They go to their conferences dressed up in like raccoons and animals, and they said it's more like cartoon based. You should look, furries, it's very prevalent.
There's some people with balloons I've seen.
Yeah, whatever. So I don't agree. But the point here, what I'm getting at here, the Buddhist explanation would be, whatever you have constant craving for, that habit stays in your mind, and then it seems to multiply massively in the future, So then an ordinary person who, let's say, look at our culture. I mean, I know this sounds weird to us. We're almost going to be fundamentalist, but please hear my point. Attachment is this underlying constant, that always wants the nice. So then it's fixation. It's, what are all the words we use in the West? Obsessive compulsive. All that is attachment at a strong level. Being a junkie, being an addict, all that's what attachment is. So then when you've got strong attachment with something, so look, think about cartoons. Think about pets. Think about stuffed toys. We're obsessed with animals. So here's this boy, a nice white Christian boy, who's got intense attachment to have sexual contact with stuffed toys. He said he tried animals of human size, human appropriate size like Alsatians, but he'd like him. He prefers his stuffed toys. So then it's, attachment is very creative. Attachment, you know, an ordinary old-fashioned boy would like a girl shape. So the moment their eyes land on that shape, and it's merely shape, remember, eyes can only see shape and colour. But look what happens, instantaneous, little, you know, things stand up and little things happen. Are we communicating here? But it's habit. This poor little boy, he got turned on by the Mickey Mouse mascot. This other guy got turned on by torturing. Well, the fisherman maybe he's less turned on, but he was excited about fishing. So obviously when something, so this is the point, this is why it's so hard to change attachment, why it's even hard to see that attachment is a negative state of mind, because it does trigger pleasure. The pleasure's fine. Nothing wrong with pleasure. That's called happiness. That's not the problem. The only problem we've got, Buddha says, is the only way we know how to trigger pleasant feelings is to get an object of the senses. It's like we're as thick as posts, you know, we've got to get lots of puffing and panting and grinding and chewing and eating and hearing and sleeping and touching to get pleasant feelings. Whereas the Buddha says our mind in its nature is in the nature of bliss, and the method to access that bliss is to remove your rubbish. It's a very different method. That's his method of getting happy. So to this fisherman, there he is, strong karmic connection, strong tendency to kill. He sees fishing. Instantly his attachment ripens. Instantly it triggers pleasant feelings. And instantly it makes the fishing look divine. So logically, oh, I must go fishing again. It makes me happy. Is this not the logic of our entire lives? So of course we don't, you know, we eat food, we go here, we go there, we don't seem to want to go torture people. We would be a bit confused if we wanted to torture. Of course we'd keep it secret, wouldn't we? We know the world doesn't approve. We know it's not cool to want to torture people. So that's why this guy had to do it in secret. So attachment is this junkie in us that will only want something nice, and because we have this body made of the senses, and Buddhism has this description of what it is and why, karmically, then the only method we have to trigger pleasant feelings in our body and mind is to get an object of the senses. So in his case it's killing fish. In someone else's case, eating food, having sex, buying handbags, whatever. Attachment is limitless in its capacity to find things to do to trigger pleasant feelings based on our habits. So naturally this guy would never for 1 millisecond question that fishing must be bad. And this is the tragedy, meaning he never saw suffering all the years he went fishing. His mother never liked fishing, she said, because she was always trying to be respectful to her boy. And she went fishing one time and couldn't stand it. And this is the point, because she did not have attachment to fishing, therefore, and this is what attachment does, attachment makes up this fantasy story about fishing. How divine, how special. So that means he was blind as a bat. All the years he went fishing, he saw these fish flapping in his boat, dying an agonizing death. That's a fact. But he never once was able to see suffering, because all he saw was his own story projected onto the fish. That's what we all do all the time. So the torturer intellectually knew it wasn't cool. But the impulse to do it, and we're very cynical about that in the West. We think, oh, everyone can change. You know, look how hard it is to change our habit to even stuff too much food in the mouth. You know, we're not harming. Cake doesn't mind if you stuff it in. Look how hard the habit is. Look how hard the habit is, you know. Because that's what habits are, very deeply ingrained. Hard to say no, you know. So can you imagine the intensity of having the habit to jump on little girls since you're born, to torture animals, to jump on little animals, to have sex? I remember reading about a guy in Australia. This is so common, but we just don't read about it. We joke when we read about it. This guy in a farm, you know, who was attached to having sex with the animals, with the cows and everything. So his wife got so upset. I mean, she didn't leave him, for God's sake. I don't know why she didn't. Then she'd sell all the cows. Then he started having, no, with the goats, because they were small. Then he sold all the goats. Then he kept having sex. She'd be finding him out in the middle of the night with his elbow up the bum of the cow, trying to, you know, I mean, like the poor guy was really attached to having sex with a cow. I'm not trying to criticise. This must be called suffering, huh? She didn't know what to do with him. She was so distressed. There he is naked in the morning and the cars are driving past and he's up there trying to have sex with a cow with his elbow, with his arm up to his elbow. Please, you've got to have compassion, okay? That's habit. This is the Buddhist explanation. I don't read about these stories in Buddha's teachings. He just talks polite stories. But are we communicating, you know? So the attachment is an intense, deeply ingrained. habit. These are the gross examples, you know. And so we laugh at the fairies. But this guy, you know, on Vanity Fair, all his money he spends on eBay buying these stuffed animals, you know. He showed even the Mickey Mouse where he has his sex. He pointed it out. So this is really also proving the bigger point the Buddha makes. Everything's made by the mind. It's all concepts. One person looks at a girl and gets all excited. One person looks at an animal and gets excited. One person sees killing and gets excited. It's whatever your habit is, your habit. And this is the killer. So that fisherman, because he was living in a culture that no one, where they didn't criticise fishing, there was never any compulsion to stop the fishing. He got good feelings every day, so the no-brainer is you better keep doing it because you want good feelings. And this is what we found. He found his profession. That means he never saw the suffering. That's the tragedy. You know, when it comes to harming others. Eating cake, you just harm yourself. Jumping on too many girls, that's okay, they might enjoy. You're not mean to them. You harm yourself because you're just constantly building up craving. And don't hear it as moralistic. Really do not hear it like that. Have as many girlfriends and boyfriends as you like. It's not the issue. It's what we're doing to our own minds. You know? Seeing the suffering of attachment. It's a bottomless pit of craving that can't get satisfaction. That's the thing that's really hard to see. That's why it's not a punitive issue, it's a practical one. In fact, my mother used to say, the more you get, the more you want. We all know this, it's a truth, we all know it. That's Buddha's point, it's very simple. But the killer here is how you can't see the suffering you're causing when you're harming others. So, you know, I remember on the television watching an interview with one of those Inuits, we used to call them Eskimos, who bashed the baby seals to death. You know, it's blatantly obvious the poor seal is not happy. But he was really upset, almost in tears, when these rude animal rights people criticised his culture. That's how he saw it. He was a nice guy. He didn't bash his wife. He had karma to bash baby seals. And that was the culture he got brought into due to his past habit. And so then you're doing what daddy says, you're doing what your culture says, so you don't... There was the baby seal blurting out blood, screaming, and he doesn't see suffering. I mean, it shows how stupid we are. It shows how delusions overwhelm our mind and they make their own story. We create our own fantasy and we dump that fantasy onto everything. Buddha's literally true when he says that we are creating stories all day. And now some of them are valid. Love, compassion, they're reasonable, valid conceptual stories. They're in sync with reality. These other ones aren't, they're just living in fantasy land. So not only do they harm ourselves, but when you do things like that, they harm other people as well. That's the tragedy of attachment, because it doesn't look like it's suffering, you know. Are we communicating here? Mm-hmm. Okay, what's your question?
Talking about karmic attachment.
Karmic what?
Attachment.
Attachment, no, attachment. It's a state of mind.
Yeah. How is it when it's over people?
What?
When it's over somebody else.
When you have attachment for someone else.
Yes. And how is it? Imagine, okay, you will do what you can, so this is not coming back in the next life.
I'm a bit confused, darling. I'm a bit confused. Start again.
Like in your movie, or let's say the Titanic, or in this romantic movie where it's a big connection between two people.
Okay.
On one side, you will realize it's karmic and it's attachment, and so you will do what you can.
What do you mean, do what you can?
You will work on it. So.
Oh, I see. So you have a relationship with, so you meet a certain person, you fall in love, got a strong connection with this person, yeah. You have lots of attachment, but you're working on your mind to be more loving and more patient and more kind and less attached. Is that right?
No.
No.
But the story ended bad, one of them died, let's say. And so you are on your side, you have time to work on this, so it's not coming back the other time. In the next life, you won't have this attachment or again that bad, which is not good attachment.
Like the fisherman will not be a fisherman again in the next life. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, but now I'm talking about a human in between.
So what's the actual question? Just say the question.
Or is it not to that it happens again the next time, the next life? I mean,
but listen, okay, I understand.
I understand. When it's human, because
yeah, I understand,
it's on both sides.
We've got countless. The Buddhists would say, let's put it this way: if our mind goes back and back and back, that means we've got countless connections with countless people. First point, okay. So we're going to meet in different scenarios. You'll meet one life and they'll be your enemy. You'll meet another life, they'll be your beloved, right? So it's not a question of just one not coming back. It's a question of generally giving up attachment, giving up creating negative karma, till eventually you cut the whole thing. Of course. I mean, in general, that's what practice is. Quitting the rubbish, and that's all.
But if it's both sides.
But I know you got karmic connection with millions of people, not just one. And of course, but the point is, you've been their enemy in another past life as well. So you've got to give up all your attachment and your anger towards that person. Of course you do. But but you've got a strong karmic connection. You've got to keep meeting them again. Nothing wrong with that. You just want it to be more healthy and more valid and more loving and more wise relationship. Nothing wrong with meeting people again. You can't help that part. But you've got to make it valid and virtuous and reasonable. Do you understand? Yeah. Is that what you're asking? Okay. What else? Yeah.
I might be simplifying too much.
That's okay, don't worry.
But I understood that you said that whatever that gives pleasure to me or excites me, it's because I have an attachment to it. So my question would be, if something excites me, what should I do?
I understand. Okay. Technically, I understand. Yeah, exactly, I understand. When we realize, okay, first of all, this habit. So you know that I'm born in Australia, and in Australia, since a little girl, you get fed Vegemite. Have you heard of Vegemite? It's a thing that we put in our toast. So Americans taste Vegemite; they think it's repulsive. So then we can say that due to habit, even just as an Australian, this black stuff that you put with your butter on your toast, the habit since a little girl, meeting my tongue, because of the habit of seeing it like that and developing this idea, oh, I like my Vegemite, you build up this conceptual story about Vegemite, and then when you see the Vegemite, that shape, you call it delicious, and you've got the habit of calling it delicious, so naturally it triggers a pleasant feeling when it meets your tongue. So that is opinion. So much of what we experience is because of the stories we put on top of things. But nevertheless, we've still got the senses. We have got the senses. They have their own function. So if you're and this is where in the more advanced teachings in Buddhism, when we lessen the greedy, grasping part of attachment, there's still an aspect of attachment that's natural in the body, such that when the eyes see a certain shape, it's a pleasing shape for you and it triggers pleasant feelings. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's used in the more advanced level. So you're giving up the junky aspect of it, the greedy, grasping, shove it in the mouth with no control and no discipline, where it's really over the top, where it ends up being no pleasure at all. You're like a little pig with respect to pigs. Whereas if you give up all the greedy, grasping part and the anger and all the rubbish conceptions, you've still got a body. Your tongue doesn't fall out when you've given up attachment. In fact, the pleasure you will experience is even more, because you're no longer grasping like an animal to it. Because the nature of our body is sensory. It is how it is. You don't become do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So as we're practicing, it's levels and levels of practice. It's obvious. If you're an alcoholic, alcoholism is simply addiction to a certain object, isn't it? It's called alcohol, let's say. Well, that's attachment. Addiction is another word for attachment. Buddha just says we're all addicts, but it's a question of degree, and he goes to much more subtle levels. So it's the same function. It over-exaggerates that object. It over-exaggerates, so your craving for it grows, and then we all know the more you have it, the more sick you get, not the better. We all know that, and Buddha says that's the function of attachment. The more you get, the more you want. So it's obvious that level of attachment, the first solution is you've got to stop drinking alcohol. You just no way, you've got to say no to the object. That's the very first level, isn't it? That's reasonable. So there's some objects that we can see, everything's attachment, but you don't go crazy with it. So given that we're a reasonable human being who's not, who wants, if you want to go up to the mountains and, give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and become a monk, you give up most of the things. You'd need to, because you want to meditate all the time. But for most of us won't do that. So you be reasonable in understanding your mind. You know what is attachment and what's not. So you be reasonable. You be reasonable in what you have. So then you learn, the more you learn about what attachment is, the more you learn about the different parts of your mind, which is only what you'll learn when you study the model of the mind in Buddhism, which is quite distinct, then you'll recognize the different parts of your mind all playing a role when you have that simple experience of eating a piece of chocolate cake. Most of us are just completely mindless and just shove it in and think, oh, goo, isn't that lovely? And before we know it, we're feeling stuffed. We're not doing any analysis of the mind. So the more you understand the way the mind works, some are negative, some are positive states of mind, the more you are working and automatically analysing as you're eating, and so you're refraining from following the attachment, but you'll still have the pleasure. And then maybe we'll have a method where we offer the pleasure, where we visualise others have. I mean, there's lots of methods you can use to counteract your own greedy to make it more positive experience for your sake and the sake of others. Do you understand?
Yeah.
It's a question of degree, you know.
So if he drinks one beer every 2 or 3 weeks, or he kills, or he goes and fish every month, and then that's okay, that's not attachment. You will classify it as attachment. But he continues.
What I'm trying to say, Uzi, is everything, until we are highly realised in the Buddhist view of understanding, that we all have attachment every second naturally. It's informing everything we think and do and say every second at this very deep level. So if you're a reasonable person, you might, you have a beer every now and again. It shows you're not craving and grasping. But the point is, Buddha would suggest you don't kill anything. Attachment or not, just do not kill any sentient being, hopefully. Try not to harm. Try not to harm. At least that one. Yeah.
Does the sensory cravings have to do with the actual chemical release of dopamine?
I understand all this. This is all the physical way of explaining it, isn't it? I understand. The Buddhists would say the key to it is attachment. These things all happen, which is why it's difficult to give up attachment. But attachment is a state of mind. It is not physical. Story that out of intense habit, that fisherman, the ancient habit, Buddha says, many lifetimes of habit, he's programmed with that habit. So then as soon as his eyes land on that shape and colour, attachment is triggered mightily and then makes up this fantastic story about how divine it is and triggers very delicious feelings. So yes, all that business is happening, but the cause of that, even that, is the state of mind beneath it. The physical is simply the symptom, not the cause.
So the physical will continue happening.
Yeah.
You have to stop the...
Yeah, but once you change the mind, the physical will no longer happen. That's the point. That's the point. If I can, let's say, and that's what's hard. If you can give up your if you can analyse chocolate cake and call it differently and analyse it and break it down and realise that your attachments make up a complete bloody fantasy, then you will really literally see it differently. So your body will be... This is why the brain business, these last years, people doing experiments on the brains of meditators. So there's one particular French monk who's had his brain analysed doing just simply thinking about compassion. It's completely changed his brain. So this is the Buddhist point, that the mind is the way we see things is the fundamental. When that changes, that affects the physical. We're not a slave of the physical. We are effectively slave of physical. Sometimes it can be very serious. If you've got allergies and things, you can't say you're not a slave of the physical. But finally, the mind is the cause, in the long term as well as the short term. So that's even with it. So when it even comes to things, especially sexual attachment, we always think, especially men. I mean, poor men have this thing that stands up, you think they've got no control. The poor thing, it's almost like it's got a life of its own. I mean, it's a joke, but it's real. It seems to have a life of its own, and it's the most natural thing in the world. If some boy who likes girls sees a pretty girl, his thing stands up. We just go, oh, that's natural, we crack a joke, No, because the person's mind is programmed with attachment to girl shapes, as opposed to stuffed toys, as opposed to killing fish. So for the torturer, he got his thing standing up by torturing people. Can you imagine that horrible habit? So the key is the habit of having done it before, such in this life you see it and boom, even as a kid, you'll just get excited. And we think that's why we call it natural. It is, but you come programmed with it. So it's finally a conceptual story that all it is a shape with a couple of lumps here, a hole between the legs, with a certain thing here. It's all just shape and colour. But our mind makes this dramatic analysis of it. Everything comes down to being finally that we're making up these conceptual stories, and then we're programmed with them such that in this life, as soon as you meet it again, you don't have to learn it again. You just get really excited straight away or get angry straight away based on the habit. So the mind is the final one. And the Buddhist view, even long term, it even causes the physical to be a certain way, which is interesting. I mean, long-term explanations. Yeah. But it doesn't mean it's not hard. It's intensely hard. And this is the tragedy is, because of his habit to kill this boy, and because it gave him pleasure, and then because the world accepted it, no one complained, he didn't have to do it at night like the torturer, he believes it's delicious. He doesn't see the suffering. And so naturally he always believes fishing is good. It means even those fish in the boat every day, and even, I mean, I can see this with my mind. I'm attached to meat. Best for me not to eat meat. I eat meat sometimes. But I'm attached to meat. If I see what I like best, it's meat. There's no question. Fruit, boring. Vegetables, boring, you know? Honest, I'm serious. I remember your sister's son. Remember your sister's son? She'd feed him a pound of steak every meal when I go there. Your sister, her boy loved meat. I remember, I thought, that's just like me, you know? Remember? That's right.
Our younger.
That's right. So I remember, so for me, it's really good not to eat meat because I'm attached to it. So one of my sisters is a vegetarian. She's not a Buddhist. And I said to her, why are you a vegetarian? I asked her when she was about 60, you know? Oh, when I see it, I see a cow. How could I eat it? Well, I nearly burst into tears. I know it's a cow, but when you're attached to something, you see your own story.
Yeah.
Therefore, you don't see the truth. That's really, it's very evident, I think. You know, if you're really attached to having sex with girls, you'll do anything. You mightn't go around raping them, but you go around seducing them just to get it in their pants. We know that. That's why poor girls will feel so kind of used. You know, he just wanted my pants after all. I mean, I get my point, people. I know I'm talking fast here. Are we communicating? Yes. And then we blame the object. I always remember when I was this is very funny. Maybe you not think it's funny. When I was a radical feminist in London, it was the late 60s, early 70s. I was always radical, okay? And I had this policy that any man who would, you know, he basically was praising my chest. I had a very nice chest, right? So he'd whistle and say words about my chest out loud. So I had this policy where I would go up to him and I'd shout at him, insult the thing between his legs, and make him embarrassed in public. That was what I did, and I did it all the time, right? So this particular guy, I remember, it was in the Greek part of London. All these Greek guys in the cafes drinking their ouzo, and this fellow's eating his fish and chips. So he says something to me, and I come across the road and I punch him in the nose, you know. And his fish and chips go flying. And usually I'd abuse him, and the poor guy would look embarrassed and do nothing. But this guy started to want to punch me back. So I was running down the street, and then he punched me in the nose, you know. Oh no, that's the wrong story. Sorry, that's about karma. Forget that one. But it's a similar story. It was an Italian guy in Soho. This Italian guy, this old guy, he whistled at me or did something, and I walked up to him. That's right, this is the point of the story here. And I abused him, and he was almost in tears. And this is the point now. He said, if you don't want me to say something, why are you dressed like that? Which means attachment blames the object. Of course, men do blame women. I mean, the typical old-fashioned view, you rape them because they wear short skirts, it's their own fault, you know. That's just a viewpoint. That attachment, when we've got attachment, this is a really good example, we feel like it's not our fault. You know, you put the cake there, what can I do? It's demanding that I eat it. It's not my fault, it's the cake's fault. Is that not how we feel when you're attached to something? Well, that's the way attachment feels, like a little victim. So that man I felt sorry for him. He was in tears almost, because it was so clear in his mind. Or like those poor Indian boys, you know, on the bus, who raped and abused and stuffed a metal pipe up that girl. And even the interview, they interviewed one of the boys, he was so innocent. But he was really clear, his mind. It wasn't political, it was just how he thought, because it's his culture. But of course she deserved it. She shouldn't have been there, then I wouldn't have done it to her. That's the logic of delusions. Delusions blame the outside. And that's 100% that one. It's such a perfect example. But this guy, I remember, he was really sad. He cried almost. But if you don't want me to say something, why do you look like that? And this is I'm not being male or female here, it's attachment. Like, it's not my fault, the cake's sitting there, I have to stuff it in, you know. That's how deep our attachment is. We feel like this little victim being dragged. You know, the fish are there, you've got to kill them. The cake's there, you've got to eat it. The girl's there, you've got to have sex with her. That's how deep attachment is. We feel like we don't have a choice. And look at our pathetic attachment to food. I mean, one of my attachments is still food. I think about it when it's not there. I think about having it and not having it and eating too much and not eating enough. And you work on it all the time, but it's their very old habits. They're not going to disappear. So you might have to work with your habits till the day you die. I don't think it's going to go away. But the more analytical you come, the more clarity, and I'm using the Buddhist model, to analyse, literally to use the analysis of what it is, what it's not, and we'll talk about emptiness later, which is all this stuff leads to, this more subtle view of how things really do exist. Then all you can do is do that, you know, and see your mind. And that's practice. That's called practice, you know. Are we communicating? I'm sure we are. So what I wanted to talk about also is if we've got all these good qualities and we have all the rubbish ones and they're all mixed together, that's the problem. That's the problem. This is one example. When the habit is that strong, and not only because it's strong, but because of the pleasure it triggers. This is the tragedy. So it's really hard then to work out, well, if I get such pleasure, that's why we think pleasure is a sin. Because we think attachment, the craving is wrong, so the pleasure must be wrong. But this is a really interesting point. It's not like that for the Buddha. It's not like that. Pleasure is, okay, when you study the Buddhist model of the mind, you study, like I said before, 3 categories of states of mind. And the first is the negative neurotic ones, the second are the virtuous positive ones, and the third, they call these neither positive nor negative, and these are all like the technical parts of the mind. I like to call them the mechanics of the mind. One of these is called concentration, all these different ones. You need these. Everybody needs these to function, whether you're a good person or a bad person. Good concentration, good alertness, good memory, this kind of stuff. Well, there's another one of these. It's called feeling. And it's happening continuously. And there's only 3 kinds of feeling. And if we analyse our own lives, we'll understand this. There are pleasant feelings, another word for happiness. And we're talking internal here. Our common habit is, if you think, are you happy? Then why? And you'll give all the answer, you'll give all the things outside. Even while we use the word attachment, we'll refer to the things. So if I'm happy, I'll refer to the nice things that happened. But happiness is literally a state of mind, a happy feeling. Then you've got unhappy feelings. We know those. And that's called suffering. Then the third category are called neutral. Well, really, let's forget those for now. We all know we only want the nice feelings and we can't stand the unnice feelings. This is sort of obvious. We take this utterly for granted. So if throughout the day we've got happy feelings, we think we had a good day. But usually the point is this. Having this mind of ours is in this body, right? So because this body is a sensory body, there are 5 senses, literally the way we are now. Okay, happiness is a state of mind. It's consciousness. But our consciousness, Buddha would say is not physical, is embodied. So the only way we know generally how to trigger a pleasant feeling, think the words I'm saying, the only way we know how to trigger a pleasant feeling, because let's face it, that's what we want, is to get an object of the senses. The cake, the body, the music, the thing to look at. This is our method because we are sensory beings in our nature. But it's the only method. Now we know that you wake up in the morning some days and you just feel good. No idea why. We just feel good. It's like a bonus, you know. We didn't think we did anything to cause it. It's just suddenly you feel good. And we think, oh wow, this is great. And then what happens is the smallest thing that goes wrong, then suddenly you don't feel good anymore. It always feels so fragile, doesn't it? Because, I mean, you know, and the Buddha would certainly suggest it because we have no idea what is the cause of happiness. We just don't know. We assume it's the objects of the senses. So we keep trying to trigger happy feelings by getting those objects. But his simple point, and again, don't hear it as moralistic, is that it's fine. When you eat the cake, when you have the sex, when you look at the lovely thing, when you hear the lovely music, there's no question the contact with your sensory consciousness and that object does in fact trigger pleasant feelings. He's not saying you shouldn't have it. All he is saying is that we don't have any other method for getting the pleasant feelings, but our trouble is, and this is the subtler level of suffering. The first level, remember I said, is the suffering of suffering, which is simply when the bad things happen. But this one is the suffering of change, Buddha calls it. And this is what we refer to as happiness. And the method we use to get happy feelings is get the nice person, the nice bag, the nice job, the nice words, the nice sounds, the nice music, the nice things to look at. This is our method. We spend our lives manipulating the outside world to get it just so, because we are very convinced when we get that, we will get happy. Now it does trigger a happy feeling. And Buddha points out, which we can all prove, but it's kind of very annoying, that the very thing that triggers your happy feelings, the chocolate cake, if you keep eating it, contrary to our wish that the happy feelings will keep coming, we all know they gradually turn into unhappy feelings, and eventually we'd vomit if we ate more. Even the girl you think is the best sex in the universe, please now, excuse me, I'm being gross, but get my point. Keep having sex with her. Don't stop. Don't go to sleep and wake up hungry again. Keep having sex with her. And I mean keep having sex with her. You will die of exhaustion and disgust. This is a logical fact, but we don't like to think of it like this. It sounds absurd to say it, but it's a fact. So the trouble is, Buddha says, there's this immense disconnect in our mind. We have the craving, which is attachment, for happiness, which is valid. Happiness is valid. Happiness is valid. Buddha's got his own methods, and I'm going to talk about it. We're implying it here. But he says our methods for getting happiness are really faulty. And we're living in denial of the fact that the thing that causes your happy feelings, that body and that cake, will soon become the very cause of your disgusted feelings if you have too much of it. We know this is true, but it seems too depressing to think about it. So what's the learning there? Well, the learning is, because we're so craving for happy feelings, we're going to have one piece of cake and two pieces of cake and then three pieces of cake, and we keep putting more cake in this frantic hope that maybe the next one will bring me the satisfaction so that I can relax and go, wow, now I've found happiness and I'm blissful. But we know it doesn't happen like that. The happiness does come, but it's fleeting. It's fleeting, it doesn't stay, because as soon as you stop having contact with the cake, you get over it, you get over your indigestion, you get hungry again. As soon as you're have sex with the girl, it's pleasant for a while, you have a nice sleep, and you have hungry again. So you've got to keep doing it again to get to pleasure, another moment of pleasure, and then another moment, but they don't last. This is so obvious, but it's horrible to hear it. It feels like irritating a Buddha to point it out. But so we live in a fantasy. We even say, finally I have found happiness. Because what we do is, because we're so craving, we're so desperate to find pleasant feelings, that we make this fantasy that when we've got them, they're going to last. And then even more devastation, you know, when he leaves you or dies on you or something. Because we're living in a fantasy land. We've got all these stories that our mind has made up, you know. So we can't see reality. And this goes really subtle, really deep, Buddha says. So like, attachment is like a bottomless pit. You can't, happy feelings, perfect. But our methods are lousy, Buddha says. They're the methods of a junkie. So then, reasonably, what's Buddha's boring old method then? What's he saying? I've implied it all the way through. Okay, how he talks about the mind, like I said, in a lot of the texts you're going to read, all the yogis, the meditators, wax lyrical about the natural the natural joy, the natural state of our own mind. We're not talking the brain, we're talking our consciousness. That's why I use the analogy of like water, you know. That the virtues, that clarity, virtue, kindness, wisdom, intelligence, love, compassion, these are the natural state. So the more they are prevalent in our mind, the more joyful our mind, because it's natural. The more attachment and fears and anger and all the rest, the more misery in the mind. So his method, okay, our method for triggering happy feelings, we are convinced that happiness, happy feelings, is what you get when you get the object of attachment. Buddha says, no guys, you've got the wrong method. Happiness is what you get when you give up attachment. That's essentially what he's saying. So, you know, in this book of Lama Yeshe I've just edited, it's coming out with Wisdom next year on Mahamudra. He's got a whole chapter on the benefits of achieving single-pointed concentration. I'll just read you, give you some inspiration. It's not the goal. It's just to be inspiring about the potential of our own mind. You know, we don't talk like this at all. It's like it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like science fiction to us. Is that the one? Oh, this is the one. Okay. Okay, there's a whole chapter here on single point of concentration. The benefits of single point of concentration are incredible, he says. So the results of concentration are unbelievable. Okay, I'll tell you a story first. Okay, not a story, I'll tell you. I interviewed in our magazine more than 20 years ago one of our meditator monks, Rene, a Swiss monk. He's been a professional meditator for years and years, you know. So he told me more than 20 years ago he was meditating in our centre in Spain, Urselding, just up the mountains out of Granada, where the Dalai Lama blessed it in 82 and named it the place of clear light, Urselding. So I remember, anyway, he meditated up there for 2.5 years doing this concentration technique, and he said he maybe just touched upon the 5th of the 9 stages of this technique. So it shows it's way to go, you know, to get it, to get this concentration. So that means even to some degree he had gone beyond, to some degree he'd gone beyond the grosser levels of his own sensory and conceptual consciousness. Again, I keep repeating, a level of consciousness that we don't have methods to access, that we don't even posit as existing in our materialist culture, okay? So he just touched upon the 5th, and what he said to me roughly was, he said there was no question that the joy, the pleasure, whatever words you like, happy feelings, joy, pleasure, bliss, ecstasy, that he experienced in his mind, just his mind, was so superior to any joy or bliss he'd ever experienced through his senses. So this is the point I'm making, and this is not the goal of meditation, it's just a bonus, it's a byproduct that you get bliss, because it's the natural state of a mind that's unencumbered, even temporarily, to grosser levels of the neuroses and the delusions and the sensory experiences, you know. It's a technical point. So the results of concentration are unbelievable, almost unimaginable. When we understand this, when we realize how amazing the results are, who would not want to try to achieve it? So one is, as if you could count every atom. As your concentration gets stronger, you remove the various layers of grosser consciousness and reach ever subtler levels. What I'm talking about is something simple. When we concentrate uninterruptedly, we can close the door to the superstitions. That's one of the words they use for delusions. We can also stop perceiving form, colour, smell, and so forth. From his own experience, Lama Tsongkhapa says that you can reach a point of such clarity in your meditation that your mind feels almost infinite. You will feel that the nature of your mind is crystal clear. Having developed such clarity, the mind is so sharp, so clear, as if you could count all the atoms of the universe. This level of the mind is more powerful than even in scientific instruments, and they say it like that, you know, all the yogis say. Even your dreams are light, and your sleep is like meditation. And when you're out of meditation, you're able to effortlessly integrate the teachings in your mind. And when the delusions do arise, you can easily deal with them, stopping them effortlessly. You'll experience bliss. In the subtle state of concentration, you'll experience bliss, ecstatic bliss, just naturally. This is because the grosser level of our mind has ceased. All the contradictory concepts have disappeared. The mind is so clear. In the beginning, the bliss is experienced physically, which is more gross. But as your concentration deepens, as you remove the layers of grosser consciousness, you experience bliss only at the mental level. You've gone beyond the physical world of the 5 sense objects. The more concentration you have achieved, the more integrated you are, and thus the more rapture, the more bliss you will experience. So I mean, these words sound like kind of weird, don't they? They sound like religious, sounds like naughty almost. Oh, that's a bit sinful. Rapture. You've got to get married to have that. But this is just the nature of the mind. It's the nature of the mind. It's the nature of the mind. But see, this is where the trouble is. People, you see this, so many people I met around the world have got some, I'll put it this way, Buddhist way, they've got some karma with meditating from past life habit. They sit down and then they experience some bliss. Then they go berserk. And why they go berserk is because they don't understand they've got attachment. So if you've got attachment, which is a junkie in you, of course you're going to get like a junkie for the bliss. You'll be like a little vampire for the bliss. But the point is, if you've given up attachment, the bliss will be there, but you won't go berserk. It's really clear. You'll be able, you've got clarity, you understand it, you've got compassion, you've got wisdom, so that it doesn't make you berserk. You understand what it is. You're kind of like intelligent about it. Do you understand? I mean, even when you're kind of craving for a piece of toast, you're out of control, you know? You shove it in. Oh, did I eat the toast? You don't remember because attachment goes mad, you know. Do you understand?
Of course.
So when there's no attachment, this is the point here too, Uzi, when there's no attachment, this junkie in there, there is only the clarity, there is only wisdom, there is only joy, that the mind would not be berserk, it would never be greedy, because this is a natural state of your mind. And when you can taste it and know what you're doing, then many people, like, you know, have sort of experiences, they go crazy. One woman who started in Queensland years ago, she started just doing a little meditation. She got bliss. She was like a little vampire to get that bliss again. But I mean, what's the difference? I'd rather go and have bliss with a nice, handsome man, please. And have it, instead of have it on your own if you just want the bliss. I mean, yeah.
Can I ask something? So if you see somebody with a big attachment to drugs or alcohol,
Yeah.
can you do something to actually make them stop? Or
No, you can't make them stop at all. It's up to them to do this job we're discussing. This is the job of being a Buddhist, give up attachment. You've got to want to do it, darling. We'll talk about this in a minute. I was going to talk about how compassion gets mixed up with our attachment. We'll discuss it. Okay?
I have a question about boredom in all of this.
Boredom? We're talking about bliss here, not boredom.
I know, but
She wants to hear about boredom when she's talking about bliss.
boring.
What?
It becomes boring.
What does, darling?
There's a height of meditation, the bliss that you get, and if you give up your attachments, like I'm not a Buddhist nun, I'm not going to ever be one, but I can live in this world, and I'm giving up my attachments.
I'm not discussing giving up things, I'm just discussing giving up attachment.
Well,
Not things.
I'm giving up.
Well, I'm not suggesting you give up anything.
Okay,
What are you talking about? That's your business.
Of course.
That doesn't mean you're giving up attachment.
Yes, but I don't eat meat.
It doesn't mean you're giving up attachment, honey. You're not discussing the same thing. We're not discussing the same thing. You're just giving up things. Everyone can do that. That's nothing special. Animals give up things too. That's not giving up attachment. Giving up attachment is changing your mind.
Emotion.
But I have to change my mind to give up.
So why are you changing your mind? You've got a different view from me. I'm not talking about attachments. I'm talking about attachment. What's attachment then, from your view? What's attachment, darling?
For example, if I was into alcohol,
Okay. Then,
isn't that an attachment?
well, no, it's not an attachment. Attachment is a state of mind. You're using it for an object. You can use it that way, but it's not the way I'm using it. It's a state of mind. So go on, what's your opinion about boredom? What's your business about boredom?
Well, so to get the bliss, meditation, yes, you get the bliss, and you give up, I give up all these things.
Yeah, so then?
There's a level of, I find that there's a level of staleness.
Okay, well then clearly you're not doing what Buddhism says. You better check your methods, baby. Sounds like disgusting what you're doing. I'm sorry.
What? Disgusting.
It sounds disgusting what you're doing then. If you become bored, then clearly you're on the wrong track, honey, so you better check your methods, is what I'd suggest.
Oh, I'm checking in with you.
Well, I'm glad you're here, so you should listen more and you might get some new, fresh ideas. Because if you had to say that, in the end, if all this fucking stuff is about to become bored, excuse me, you should sue me and throw me out the door on my head. If that is actually the result, it's so repulsive what you're even suggesting.
I don't mean to be repulsive.
No, try and hear me. I'm a very dramatic person. Get the point I'm making. If the fucking point of all of this years of Buddha's hard work, and there's 2,500 years of all these people doing this, is to become bored, seriously, what am I doing? I must be out of my brain.
But I'm not going to get to that level.
Excuse me, what are you talking about then? What's your point then? Okay, what's your point then? Ask me your question, please. What's your point, honey?
I don't really know what my question is.
Well then shut up then if you don't have your question. Leave it in peace then, do not go there.
No, it's a feeling
Jesus
of
wept.
importance.
Are you just repeating your point?
Yes, because I'm not.
So ask me your question, please.
How do you move beyond?
I have never had boredom in my bloody life. I would not know. Okay, darling? I don't know. I'm just so speechless. Or not speechless, but shocked.
Maybe it's not a good word in you.
Never mind. Let her say what she likes. It's all right, darling. Were you here yesterday?
No.
No.
Okay, well that explains it. Yeah. Okay.
Attachment is delusions, is our delusions, which is making us unhappy.
I understand, darling. Listen.
Unhappy as such.
No, darling, listen. I don't know what method you're using. You can do what you like. Everyone's allowed to do what they like. But what I'm talking about here, what I'm talking about here is these methods of the Buddha. He says that we've got these neuroses in our mind, attachment and craving and grasping and anger and jealousy and despair and all this stuff that is the source of our pain and is the source of doing things to harm others and ourselves, and it repeats in suffering. The things that cause are the source of our happiness are the virtues within us. So to get rid of the delusions and grow the virtues is the bottom line. So how would you be if you were like that? I will tell you how you'd be, sweetheart. If you are doing the job that he's talking, you'd be, if you even begin the first stages of practice and lessening attachment and all the delusions, you would be blissfully joyful. I mean, I'm not talking subtle levels of bliss like you have when you go beyond your body. But if you're doing the job that he says, I don't know what job you're doing, I don't know. But if what you're doing is bringing boredom, then I would suggest it's the wrong job. I would only say that based on your words. The result of giving up this attachment, giving up anger, giving up fears, giving up depression, giving up slowly, incrementally, slowly, working on your mind fiercely every day, the result is more joyful, more empathetic with others, more happy, more fearless. That would be the result. That would be the result of what he's saying. What methods you're using, I do not know. And if boredom is the result, then I'd suggest the methods aren't working.
I wouldn't say it's a result, I'd say
you said it. You said
it's something.
Okay, you're not hearing me then. If you said, you keep repeating, boredom comes. Or you're just being intellectual here. You're describing what you think is going to happen.
Yes.
Huh?
He's intellectual here.
She's not really feeling boredom. Are you intellectualizing about boredom, thinking that would be the result, or are you actually experiencing boredom?
I think I'm experiencing boredom.
Okay, well then.
I level out to.
Okay, so then I keep repeating the answer to you. You are using the wrong methods. What the hell in God's name would you want to use methods to get bored? Why would you do that? Please answer my question.
Everything comes through. Marriage.
Excuse me, are you okay?
Eating gets level.
Because it's attachment.
Yes.
Well then give it up. I'm sorry, we have to have lunch soon, I think. No, it's only 12:15. I'm sorry, darling, I'm not being impatient with you. I don't know where to start. What you're saying is so massive, okay? Just relax and listen. Just relax and listen. I'm going to stop the bliss chapter now. It's too much for me. Okay, so let's now talk about here. Where are you? Where are you? Compassion and here you, darling. What's your name?
Yanni.
What's your name, darling? Sweetie Pie?
Melanie.
Thank you, Melanie. It's okay, really, yeah. No, sweetheart, it's perfect. What you're saying is perfect. I really understand. I really do. I forgot your name again. Who?
Joanna.
Okay, Joanna. So you know somebody who's an alcoholic, yeah? And it breaks your heart. It makes you sad. Yeah?
I'm really sad.
Okay, good. Perfect example. Thank you. Okay. So what's going on here is this. There's two things. In you is empathy, right? You see this person suffering and you wish they didn't have it. You have that, don't you? You have compassion? You recognize that word, empathy with their suffering. You can see they're harming themselves, isn't it? Right. So then also, you see what we mightn't articulate, and what I'll do here is I'll use the Buddhist analysis of what's happening in your mind, assuming you're a regular person like the rest of us, because you've also got attachment, and attachment is this energy in us, like I'm saying, that always wants the nice things. We always want the nice things. Do we kind of understand that point? We always want the nice feelings, the nice sounds, the nice smells. We want everything to be nice. Attachment is this junkie in us that wants everything to be nice. So obviously, let's say, I don't know who it is, let's say it's your alcoholic brother. I use that as an example anyway. You've got this alcoholic brother. So clearly, your compassion side of you has empathy and you wish they'd change for their sake. But the attachment side of you is really annoyed, which is why you say you get angry. How dare they bloody well be an alcoholic and mess up my peace of mind? In a sense, that's what's happening. That's why anger comes. It's for their sake sort of too, but it's mainly because we've got attachment. So that attachment in us kind of then causes us to manipulate, to make us to try to change the person, and when they don't change we get upset. But the fact is, it's like that's their business. So if, again, this point I'm making here, if we really are working on our own mind, I'm not saying it's easy, then you would have sadness. You'd break your heart when you see the suffering. You would say something if they wanted to hear you, give advice. But in the end, if they choose, due to their own suffering, they don't change, what would come if we keep working on our own mind, we would keep our own stability. But because of attachment now, we're so unstable, the smallest thing going wrong can make us miserable, isn't it? So it's the two things is one, how to help him. But the other one is how to keep yourself stable and not overwhelmed by the presence of this person in your life, Are we communicating here? And that's the business I'm talking about, giving up the delusions, the way Buddhism's talking. Attachment is this neediness, always to have things lovely. And it can't stand it when problems come. That's why we get distressed. And if we have compassion as well, we really wish they would change. But partly it's our own needs that want them to change because they're making a mess of it. They're upsetting our life, We don't like to say it like that because it sounds so mean and self-centered. But that's what attachment causes. And then we talk about him behind his back, and then he makes our mother upset. Then we get guilty about our mother, and we blame him. And all these family dramas happen because we all sort of can't mind our own business in one sense, because attachment gets into everybody else's business, sticks its nose in. It has opinions and does this and says this and he this and she that. That's all the problem, Does it help to hear that? Because there's only so much you can do, darling. You can bring a horse to water, our mum has told us, but you can't make him drink. This is the tragedy.
Some people get abusive and...
Pardon, darling, what?
Some people can get abusive and make a mess in the house.
Well, of course they do. Well, of course they do.
Accept it.
No, I don't want to be personal in your life, but if you're living with this person, are you?
Yeah.
Well, then you've got two choices. I'm not trying to be brutal. Sweetheart, it's not easy. This is example I used yesterday. My friend who's got an alcoholic husband, 30 years ago, she decided at some point she'd weigh up the advantages and disadvantages of staying or going. She realised she couldn't change him. This is what's hard. If we could all have such intelligence and know that if we can't change the situation, we could also leave it. But we don't. We go back like a moth to a flame. We keep blaming the other person. We keep getting angry, and then we wonder we want to kill them. So if we can't handle something, I know it sounds so easy, and it isn't, but this is really the choice that we've got. Sweetheart, if this person's close to you and you love them, you either decide to make your life there and make the most of it. But if it's so overwhelming and he causes so much trouble, then sweetheart, if it's unbearable, you have to be wise and intelligent, and it breaks your heart, but leave. It isn't that easy, but it comes down to that. And that's where, if we've got so much attachment and so much anger, we can't see it as that easy. And we keep going back like a moth to a flame because we keep blaming the other person for our suffering. But if we can realise we can make choices, and that's what's tough. Are we communicating? It's not easy. Because sometimes there's no win. Whatever you do, it's going to be harmful. Whatever you do, you can't win. So because we've got to have courage sometimes. Like my friend, I literally, yesterday, you weren't here yesterday, were you? My friend, she literally decided, because he's a quiet drunk. He doesn't harm anybody except himself. But she decided years ago it was best for everybody that she stayed. Now, if the environment you're talking is not like that, and it is unbearable and is making a mess of everybody else and abusive, then it's completely insane, You've got to be a really wise, brave person to stick around that and keep your own sanity. But most of us aren't that advanced. So to cause yourself nightmares like this and have a terrible life, as well as, having the person abused, it's not that easy, but there's got to be some wisdom. And this is the point about this first stage of practice, working on ourselves. Giving up our own attachment and our own fears brings more self-respect. And then we wouldn't choose an environment to live in that would drag us down to hell, But it's not easy. But darling, it's just such practical. I'm sure all this has occurred to you before, but and to make these kind of calls, you've got to have courage, Do you understand, darling? And this is where, really confusing, using the Buddhist model again, confusing the negative states, as they call them, and the positive, having them all mixed together. We just can't see the difference, Like I'm even saying, if I love and love somebody, that means I want them to be happy. It's a virtue, but I'm also attached to them, and that's what drags us down to hell, and we can't see the difference. And that's why this is such an internal thing. And this is again why I'm saying, saying to Melanie, whatever technique she's using, we might be using even the same words, but it doesn't sound like the techniques I'm talking about. So we've got to decide what techniques we do use. And here again, I'm using the Buddhist way, very specific. These words are casual and words are easy, attachment, But the way Buddha describes them is so specific, so specific. And that's up to us to decide to use the Buddhist model or not. That's our choice, So Melanie's point is a good point. It's true. What she's talking about is, and this is one point, the three main neuroses in the mind, the Buddha would say, there's attachment, aversion, these two we run between like 1,000 times a day, like I mentioned. Then there's the third one is called ignorance, and this is sort of like, it manifests, like she's saying, as indifference and boredom. So what she's talking about, what I've heard when she just said, when you eat food you get bored, something if you get bored, she's right. So when attachment builds up this bubble, gets all excited, all anticipating this delicious cake, then when the bubble bursts, you either have aversion for it, or as she says, boredom. They're the only two options. I'm in love with Paros. I move in. It's all divine and exciting in the beginning. But then it starts to fade. I start to see his bad qualities. He stinks in the bathroom. I don't like the way he comes home at night. He does it this way. My attachment's not getting what it wanted. I'm getting more annoyed, more irritated. And one day I wake up and think, who's this boring bloke in my bed? And I chuck him out and get a new one. So it's either boredom or anger. When attachment is stopped, it's either boredom or anger. And what you're talking is boredom. Okay then, well that's not, so that's better than nothing. So learn at least that attachment didn't make you happy, and now the boredom is the result. When you give up attachment, boredom is not the result. Joy is the result. So you've given up attachments, as you said, which is objects. That's like giving up alcohol. That doesn't mean you've given up attachment. You're giving up eating meat. That's not giving up attachment. That's just the body, I would suggest. I mean, it's up to you to decide what method you're using. But also persevere. But if you've got good methods, then you keep checking your methods and see what the results are. That's up to you, isn't it? Huh? Melanie?
I'm kind of speaking generally as well.
No, don't speak generally. I want you to be specific or not just intellectual. That's wasting time. Generally means intellectual.
I think there's a gap for me. There's a gap between
what?
This world and trying to live the Buddhist way, compassion, kind,
Wait, all these massive statements you make. The Buddhist way. God almighty, what's that?
What you're talking about?
Tell me. You tell me. What's this gap? What's this gap you're talking about? What's this gap, darling?
As you're reading, it feels more enlightened to me, like there's this gap between walking every day and...
Well, obviously. Is that nothing surprising? You're starting to play Bach, you're at grade 1. There's a gap between you and Bach. Well, be a bit patient. Be a bit patient and humble. You keep working, don't you? So, of course there's a gap. Why are you surprised by that? What's the problem with a gap? Wait a minute, what's the problem with a gap? No, well, I can't answer your question. It's too vast and vague, you say. I can't even begin to get in there. I don't even know what you're saying. You're making these massive general statements. Can't even begin. It's like, it's like you're studying Bach and suddenly you say, oh, it's boring. What do I do with that? What do I do with that, So you're going to ask me more specific questions if you have a question. You've got to be more specific, darling. No, that's a meaningless question, an utterly meaningless question.
It's not. How do you move through the boredom? How do you move
I can't even begin to, I don't even know what your methods are. I don't even know what your methods are, Melanie. Tell me what your goal is. Well, then if you don't have methods, you don't have a goal, then I can't answer your questions. So you're not practicing to become like Bach after all. You've either got some methods and you're on a path and you've got techniques, then I can answer your question. So what are you doing? You just said you're trying to live this Buddha's way. What do you mean by that? This is a serious discussion, Melanie.
The basic commandments of life.
What are they?
Whether it's Buddhism or religion.
So what are they, darling?
To tell the truth.
Okay, good.
To not kill.
Good. Okay, that's a good start. So where are you heading with all this? Where's it taking you? What's the result of this?
My question came...
No, my question back to you, it was not a question, you made a massive statement. So just use the analogy of you're playing the piano, you're at grade 1. And yes, it gets boring. But then my question to you is, where are you heading with this? This is the answer to your question. Where are you heading? Why are you playing grade 1 music? Because grade 1 Buddhism is don't kill, don't lie, don't steal. So I'm asking you, where are you heading with this? Where is this taking you? What is on the road? Where are you going? What are you paving the way to? When you answer me that, you'll get the answer. So what's your answer?
Well, it's the happiness that you were.
So you hear Buddhist things and you rather like what he's saying, is what you're getting at. So you feel you're aiming to develop your own potential for happiness and get rid of suffering. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, she wants to be enlightened.
That's what I'm saying. I'm using simple. I'm using simple words for it. I just said it without using the fancy word. So you're aiming to that. Is that where you're heading? To become like Bach, Buddha?
No.
Okay, where are you heading? Good. Where are you heading? Where are you going with all this?
Somewhere up there, hopefully. To be.
Keep my analogy. It's a good one. It'll work for you. So you are moving on a path. You feel like you're paving your way to what will you be like when you get there? How will you be? What is it you think will be there when you get there? How will you be when you get there, wherever this there is for you? Roughly, use some words that you imagine.
I don't know.
Well, then why are you heading to you don't know? That sounds a bit depressing. No wonder you're bored. I'm serious. Can you hear my point? If you're talking something simple on the earth, like becoming like Bach, becoming a musician, becoming a cook, you're talking about becoming a Buddha. If that's you're using Buddhas, hear it in the same light as something practical. And then to get there, you've got to know what it's like to be like that, even theoretically. And then you've got to have methods to get there. Isn't that normal human life? So then you can't even answer that. So no wonder you're bored. You're not only bored, but you're confused. And I'm not surprised if you can't even say where you're heading. So of course you're bored and confused because you don't even know how to say where you're heading. I'm not being rude, Melanie. I'm trying to get it on the earth, not in the head. And that's our trouble with spiritual practice. We think it's up in the sky, some mystical crap, you know.
No, I don't. Anyway.
Not anyway, it's a good conversation. So where do you think, roughly, where do you think you're heading? What do you think you want? What do you think you want?
Well, I mean, the classic word is happiness. But
You want, okay, good, happiness, which
but
is...
I am happy, but I'm kind of...
Okay, well that's not happy. Boredom is not happy.
Right.
So,
I think she wants to be a better
shush, Uzi, be quiet. Shut up. Speak for yourself. So then maybe you've got to look into what you want first. It's pretty reasonable. If I say to you, do you want to go on a holiday? Oh, maybe. Well, you won't move until you know what you want. So wanting you want is pretty practical. So maybe you've got to just checking out more what you want. Isn't that reasonable?
Yeah.
But our trouble is we mystify spiritual. But if you can't even say what you want, so in other words, you're telling me you're playing grade 1, but then where are you heading? You're going to become like Bach? I don't know. Somewhere up there. It's a bit vague, darling.
This is like my Greek lessons, isn't it?
What?
Let's change it from Bach to Greek lessons. I'm studying Greek, I'm at my level. I'm not fluent, I'm not Bach.
So then?
And I'm bored.
So obviously you've got no...
To make me a better person.
Well, clearly then that's called laziness. It means you can't be bothered getting out of your comfort zone. You've only got so far. You've got no enthusiasm, and no enthusiasm means you don't know the benefits of doing it. If you've got no interest, if you don't understand the benefits of something, you won't have any enthusiasm for it, and you will only be bored, and that's attachment, and then you'll change it for something else. You'll change it to French. You'll change it to cakes. So that's just, you're just floating around on the outer edges.
All right, so what's a method to get through the laziness?
To think of the benefits of doing it. To think of the benefits. To think of the benefits of the result. I remember reading back in the 90s, these guys in the Bay Area who worked like 7 days a week, 18 hours a day for 9 months to do their company to get on the stock market. So that means they knew the benefits of what they were doing. So in the teachings they talk about 3 levels of laziness. The first one is can't be bothered. So the thing we can't be bothered doing is the thing that takes too much effort. And the thing that takes too much effort is the thing that we don't know how to do. So we'll go to a little bit of it, and then we'll go, oh, I can't be bothered. You could say that's boredom. Then the next level of laziness is a real cheating lie. It's called, oh, I'm too busy, I'll do it later. And that, what is the thing you're too busy doing? The thing you can't be bothered doing. So it comes down to attachment to our comfort zone. And the third level, the most subtle, and that's really behind all of it, is, oh, that's not possible. I can't achieve that. Nah, forget it. No way. So we stay in our comfort zone, darling. So you've got to start tasting your own potential. Get out of your comfort zone. And push. You've got to make effort. Push. But see the benefits of what you're trying to achieve. So if you want to follow some of Buddha's instructions, yes, the goal is happiness, and the goal, that means lack of suffering. That means more joy, more contentment, but that'll only come with effort. If you go to the gym, it's a good analogy, you go to the gym and you start getting a bit, you know, you do the machines, and you only get so far, but as soon as it starts to sweat, you stop. Then that's called boredom, because you don't taste any benefit from it, and that's just called laziness. And it's based on just we can't be bothered. We're all normal, that's how we all are. So when you push and make effort and come home full of sweat, you're happy because you're tasting your own potential. So what you're saying is you're not tasting any potential at all.
I got lazy, as you said.
Don't just say it too easily, but hear it, let it go in, and make a decision to do something about it. To taste your own potential. All right, now we've got some answers. It's not lunchtime, it's only 12:30. I want to go all the time. What?
This means you have to aim to get to the top.
To get what?
You want to be Buddha?
Darling,
If you
listen.
go down the road, because yesterday the one thing that I loved, what you said, is that you can only take 1% and it's fine.
Of course you can, it's your choice.
And over here, I'm hearing, I thought, I'm front.
No, both. There's no, okay, in answer to her questions, I said this way, but also to make sure people don't think you've got to swallow the whole lot. You're on your path, Uzi, but it's your path. You mightn't call it a Buddhist path or a cooking path. Your path is your life. So you very happily have a goal. If you have a goal, you can take 1% of Buddhism into that path. I'm not saying you've got to climb onto the Buddhist path. Your path is, we're all on a path. We're all on a road, but maybe we've got to be clear what it is. Otherwise, that's going to happen. That's what I'm saying. Do you see what I'm saying? Uzi, it's your call. I keep saying it's 12:30, it's another whole hour for lunch yet, but I feel you've had enough. So sorry. Go on, talk.
Before we went for tea,
Yeah. What was I going to say?
I asked about because sometimes I get very overwhelmed with compassion.
Yes. Okay. Good. Let's go into that more. Okay. All right. So there's your example of like a compassion for a person who's close to us, and I'm really close, living in the same house. I mean, that's so intense. But let's look at the one of seeing the world suffering, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's true. We can't avoid the world now. It's just overwhelming. If we have any inkling of any compassion, it is overwhelming. So that again, just using the analysis, part of the problem. Okay. The problem with the problem with seeing suffering, whether it's your brother, an alcoholic, or whoever it is, or the whole world, or the war in Syria, the poor people, whatever, is that we see it and it does trigger the virtuous part of us. It triggers our empathy. But then the next step we think, oh my God, this is overwhelming, because we don't know what to do, isn't it, to help it. Yeah. And very clearly, there isn't much you can do. And even with one person, you have to recognise there's only, you can bring a horse to water, but you cannot make them drink. So that's where you're then staring in the face of this horrible suffering, and there's nothing you can do to change it. That's what's so painful for us. And why that's painful is because attachment only wants the nice things. If we didn't have attachment, you'd have this fierce compassion, you'd have this immense courage, you'd have this immense determination to do everything you can, and it would never overwhelm you. In fact, it would make you more courageous and more strong to never give up doing what you can for however long it takes. So we've got to keep remembering, using the Buddhist view, that what makes things overwhelming for us is our attachment, our craving for things to be nice. That's why there's two options. When, I'll use two examples. Me, when I was a political activist, and being kind of an angry type person, activist person. And then my other friend, who these years now, it's more like environmentalism. For me, it was, you know, those days, whatever it was back in the 60s. So it was very interesting, the two of us, both, this is a friend of mine now, and she doesn't get angry, she gets depressed, profoundly depressed. I mean, profoundly depressed. And there with me, I'll get profoundly angry, looking like opposite in the world, but both the same. So there it is, me in my day, I'd see all the suffering, and I'd go out there and I'd demonstrate. And looking at like all full of action, full of energy, going to change the world, you know. So angry, basically. Angry, compassion is there, and then you go, how dare those people do it to these poor innocent victims? Then all your energy is focused on the mean people. And you get angry and you try to shout and yell and kick them into shape, you understand? And that's coming from attachment. It can't stand it. So then after a while that explodes and goes nowhere. It just becomes exhausted. But my friend, she doesn't get angry. Instead, she gets to the point where because I couldn't stand seeing the unhappy things, so I'd shout and yell. She can't stand to see them. So even then she said she'd drive with her husband in the car and he'd be driving. She couldn't even look at the trees. As soon as she saw the trees, she'd start thinking of environment and she'd almost want to kill everybody because she was so freaked out about it because it made her so depressed. Do you understand? So her attachment was the same as mine. It wants nice things. She wanted the nice things. Attachment, the neurotic part of us. But her compassion was still there. But our attachment pollutes the compassion. That's what makes us panic. That's what makes us freak out. That's what makes us get angry. That's what makes us get depressed. That's what makes us make a mess of everything. That's what makes us bored. Attachment's the problem, and it's not the way we talk in the West. It's quite a revelation if we think of it like this. So giving up attachment means you become more courageous, more brave. You act and then you do what you can, and even though the world is still chaos, it doesn't make you crazy. That's why I like to call the Dalai Lama a good example. Don't make him holy because he's Tibetan monk, blah, blah. Look at him for 60 years. He hasn't ever stopped for 1 second trying to change it, but he's not unhappy. He cracks jokes. He's always stable, like a rock of Gibraltar, because it doesn't overwhelm him. And it's attachment, when we've got attachment, it's like this kid inside us that can only bear the nice things. So anger and depression are the response when it doesn't get it. That's what makes us so unstable and crazy.
Acting as an attachment?
No, of course not. Absolutely wrong. That's the point. That's what my friend who was demonstrating, jigsaw, but no anger. It's because it's right. You see, giving up anger doesn't mean you become passive. We think it's that. Giving up anger does not become passive. You give up anger, you stop being upset, but you still keep acting. The Dalai Lama hasn't stopped acting for 60 years. Politically, diplomatically, socially, religiously, every method. He doesn't sit there going, oh, well, let the Chinese destroy our country. He hasn't stopped trying. This is the point I'm trying to make with you too, sweetheart. I forget your name again, sorry. Joanna, with you too. As we get rid of this as we get rid of the fears and the attachment and our depression and our anger, I know it's hard. I'm just talking to give some encouragement. Then we become fearless and you're able to make the tough choices and you won't go crazy. You'll have empathy. You'll know there's only so much you can do, but you know you don't have to be sitting around getting destroyed by it. And you make the choice, you know, or whatever. We become much more fearless, much more courageous, less neurotic. That's the point I want to keep making. And you would happily demonstrate if it's going to help, but you won't be out of control. That's why I think like Neil's not here. No. His first point yesterday blew my mind, but you just can't help it. That's how we all believe. We are victims of circumstances. We feel we're just completely enslaved by what goes on and have no control. It's the opposite.
What is it when you can't act?
But you can't, most of the time you can't, darling. Then, okay, if you're going to use the Buddhist method, which is what I'm talking here, then of course that's the one I'm using, then I have the understanding of why it's like that. It's called karma, and you analyse it and look at it, and then if you can, you do what you can to help people. You do what you can one step at a time. I mean, you know, everywhere you turn, there's a friend of mine who's a herbalist and does homeopathy, and she goes to Haiti. Every year she's overwhelmed by the nightmare. Every year it gets worse, but she just keeps going, keeps doing what she can, one person at a time. And when you have less attachment, you're less fearful, because attachment can't stand to see it all upset. We don't recognise this part of ourselves. We think it's part of compassion. It's not. It's not. You know, for me, working with people in prison for like 20 years, 15 years, I ran this non-profit. There's sort of intense suffering. Everywhere you go is suffering, you know. So especially in the States where the system is so outrageous, and it's going to get worse with Mr. Who knows what running the damn country, excuse me, whatever. But I mean, unbearable. The sentencing, the nightmares of these young people are unbearable. But I absolutely had to keep my sanity. And so I didn't, when I was a political activist, I would have dropped bombs on the prisons. So I'm walking into the prisons, dealing with these nightmarish people, this horrible bureaucracy, these mean racist people. I had to keep a happy mind, stable, and not be sentimental with my compassion for my friends I'm trying to help. I can't take them out the door. I can give them methods to help their own minds. So I showed respect, but I didn't drag it with me when I left the prison. It never dragged me down. It gave me more courage to do what I can, working on myself so I can help others one step at a time. You can't make it all go away overnight. That's just fantasy. And you get courage in the face of it, but doing what we can. Help that dog, that ant, that human, that husband, whatever it might be. One step at a time. And this ongoing process you're in is you start. That's what I'm saying to Melanie. You're not just giving up and going so far. You're going further, which is intense hard work, because you're attacking your own junk. Then that's where you get courage. That's where you get some taste of some experience from it. Otherwise, it really is boredom. I really understand your point. Do you understand what I'm saying? Good. I'm happy. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because it's not comfortable. The world is a nightmare.
I do use karma.
Yeah.
Because of 2 years ago when you came.
Yes.
It really hit. So I do try to use the karma aspect.
That's right, and that's for me is the one that, because it's the choice I'm making, at least it brings me an explanation for why. And then when you look at everybody making crazy to each other, at least you have you've got a reason, you've got an explanation for why they're doing it, and you can have some compassion for people, for our stupidity, for our ignorance, not anger. It changes from anger to compassion. Then your own mind is peaceful and yet strong, Because we've got no choice. We either bury our heads or we...
So if I see somebody abusing a dog, I should try not to become angry, but compassionate.
Be compassionate. Both of them. Do what you can. And that includes butting in and telling him off if you want to.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you've got to be all cute and soft to him.
No.
For his sake. But in your heart, it's for his sake. In your heart, it's for his sake, though. In your heart, it's for his sake, as well as the dog's. Otherwise, it's just coming from anger and, innocent victims. Then it's really powerful. And that's like tough love, But that comes slowly. You can't force it. You can't pretend it.
Yeah.
You understand?
I have a question.
Yes, darling, where are you?
If the dog is being abused because of its past karma,
Yeah.
why should you butt in at all?
You think you shouldn't try to help somebody? But do you think what's... So, okay, all right. So there's a weed in your garden, and the weed is in the garden because you grew it came from a seed, didn't it? So the weed is naturally to be expected. Does that mean you can't pull it out? Why does that?
That's my garden.
It doesn't matter whose garden it is. It's the idea is your idea. You see, your words are: if somebody caused themselves to suffer, then why shouldn't they suffer? So that's right. Well, then if you eat too much food and you get sick, someone shouldn't recommend that you go on a diet or go on a better healthy. That's kind of, if you've created the cause for your own sickness, you deserve it, and I should let you be sick. I don't think you'd agree with that. You'd try to help. If I'm eating wrong food and you know the reason I'm getting a bellyache, so I caused the bellyache myself, didn't I? Well, then I caused this sickness of being kicked in the teeth by a past person. What's the difference? So you see, the question assumes that there's no cause for why the dog could get kicked. And as soon as we discover there's a cause, then our first reaction is always, oh, well, they deserve it, let them have it. But that's not valid.
Well, then, not that they deserve to let them have it, but who am I to interfere in this interaction?
Interfering is called interfering if it's wise interference. If I'm going to be run over by a car, that's due to my past actions. But if you can save me, I think I'd be quite grateful. I think it's quite good interference to help somebody based on wisdom. Do you understand? Interference is fine, but it's got to be wise interference.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is a very interesting point now, and you bring it up. I'll use an extreme example again. Lama Yeshe was my teacher, and he's the head of our organisation. He's passed away now. He At our monastery one time in Kathmandu, one of my friends, Harry, was helping one of the monks there, who's a Nepalese monk. He's very sick. And he happened to mention to Lama Yeshe, who's also Harry's teacher, like my teacher, and he mentioned to Lama that he found a doctor to help this monk. And Lama Yeshe just said to Harry, well, just let it be. Don't get a doctor. It'll be okay. He didn't explain to Harry why. So Harry kind of had confidence in Lama, so didn't get a doctor. Well, the guy got sicker and sicker, and then eventually went up to the mountains and he died. Well, that sounds a bit like Lama Yeshe doesn't care. I mean, you would think so. He didn't intervene. Well, then the abbot there told Harry what was happening. Lama, because he's got clairvoyance, and this is something, a low-level realisation, they say, clairvoyance, to see the mind of another person. Lama Yeshe could see the mind of this monk, knew the karma he created in the past to cause this sickness, realised that if he'd gotten better, he would have been fine, life would have been great, but he wouldn't have finished the heavy karma he created, and next life would have been terrible. Whereas having the sickness now and dying, and he died really well, really peacefully, he cleaned up all the karma, next life fantastic. Now who has that level of wisdom, you know, but that's just showing the levels and levels of wisdom we could have, and so we use what wisdom we've got, you know, to help others, to help. Intervention based on compassion is perfect. Intervention based on attachment, sticking our nose in and bullying someone to change because we can't stand it, that's different. That's why we make a mess, you know, the interference. Do you understand? Because we can't, that's often why when we go and kill our dogs, because we can't stand to see the pain. We often, the animal is suffering, it's true, but we don't have the wisdom to see its mind. But because our attachment can't stand to see the pain, we then kill the dog. But the Buddhist view would be, it's like the monk. He's got a future life. And if you can't have the wisdom to see what's going to be best for that dog, then don't play Russian roulette with a dog. And it's because of our attachment that we often do that. We intervene in a way not based on wisdom. So in the end, the dog could go from the frying pan to the fire and take a really terrible next life. That would be interference without wisdom. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? Do you understand? Well, I mean, I know it's early, but I mean, it's enough. And I try to get more quieter as I get older, but I don't get more quiet. Or any less intense. So I figured it's been pretty intense, so I think you've had more than enough this morning. So I'll see you at
3.
Oh, it's 3.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right, 3.
After.
Is that okay? I'll come and have lunch with you. No, it's a bit early. 1:30's lunch, isn't it?
No.
Yeah,
1:30's lunch. I might come and have lunch with you, I'll see. Okay, you people, I hope there's been some food for thought. Any food for everybody? Some food for thought? Food for thought? You better edit out the FUCKs. Occasionally I do get to say it. That was you, Melanie. It's all Melanie's fault. Thank you, darling. That was a good point you made, sweetheart. I really got it. Thank you. Okay, people, thank you. See you soon, darlings. Thank you so much.